voice of the people. Security through adversity.
Stuck on you.
Radio for all time.
You're listening to Radio Cayman, the voice of the Cayman Islands.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense, hosted this morning by Amy Hubble. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning.
And myself, Simon Caudry. On today's show, we are joined by Suzanne Klein and Steve McIntosh. Suzanne is the founder of a new company in Cayman called Rewrite Your Future. And Steve is the CEO and a known personality to this show of CML Recruitment. Thank you, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you, Simon.
Pleasure.
On today's show, as I say, we're joined by these two people, and our focus is going to be on the role of education. Education is one of the most important investments one can make. And yet often when we talk on this show, we talk about investments in bonds, we talk about investments in equities, but we don't often enough talk about investments we can and perhaps should make more in ourselves. So this show is going to seek to understand some of the key questions in the education debate and try and help each of our listeners understand and determine if perhaps they are investing enough in themselves and how, if not, they could perhaps invest more. So let me therefore introduce Suzanne and Steve and ask perhaps Suzanne, you'd just like to give us a few words about yourself and explain what this new company is you've created.
Sure. Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Amy. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me. So Rewrite Your Future is a company that is helping educators throughout the world transition from education to entrepreneurship. And this company is started based on my background. I am a former teacher who transitioned to entrepreneurship after I had lessons that were working in the classroom. I developed a curriculum called Right Steps. That was in 2007, and it later became an education software company that we grew to 6 different countries, affecting 300,000 plus students, 100,000 teachers all across these 6 countries, and I'm really proud of what we created, and I sold that company 2 years ago, and now wanted to help teachers who either have a product in the classroom that they want to take to market and are not sure how to do that, or teachers who just are feeling like it's time to make a change, a career change, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But remain involved in education and teaching of people.
What's that?
Remaining involved in education.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Maybe not. I think it's very important for all of us to go after our passions because we spend more than half of our lives in work, and so why not do something that you enjoy doing? And so that'll all be done online and servicing mostly the U.S. teachers and UK and Australia.
Fabulous. And Steve, I don't suppose we need to introduce you terribly much because you're known to most people on this island.
Well, it's just boring as well. I just don't have an inspirational story like Suzanne.
You haven't built a company and sold it and set up a second company?
The short version is that I fell in with a bad crowd and became an accountant at an early age. I was young, I needed the money, and in 2004 founded a recruitment firm.
Fabulous. And
that's the short version.
But of course that is a business which helps people identify in much the same way, identify perhaps where their passions are, perhaps what their career opportunities might be.
And sort of maximise the return on your educational investment.
Well, that leads me to, I think, my first question, which is, to me, one of the most important things, which is perhaps misunderstood, which is, first of all, how do you measure the return on education, and what is the return on education? People, perhaps not all of us, but a lot of people went through school and were pleased to finish and hoping they'd never have to pick up a textbook or pick up a book again. But that often is a bad mistake. You need to be continuing through your life doing some education. So talk to us from your perspective, and you're actually going through it yourself right now, so talk to us from your perspective what your view is on the value and the importance of education.
It's very difficult to tell, and I'd leave the number crunching to the CFAs. so I'm in good company for that. I'd be really interested to see what a CFA would make of the calculation, actually, and I could provide the data for that, but I'm not sure what the calculation would look like.
We'll leave that to Amy, I think. We'll pass this hot potato around.
But I think the only way you can do it, so and I get asked this question quite a lot, and I think that there are a few different components to the value of education if you look at it, and obviously there is some educational value, which goes without saying, but it's not as obvious as it might seem, and it's been interesting, as you alluded to. I'm going through an executive MBA right now, which is a 21-month course, and I'm seeing education with fresh eyes in many ways, because when I was an undergraduate back, this is 25 years ago, it wasn't a particularly conscious decision.
I think
I never
were
weighed.
unconscious during our
Yeah,
undergraduate years as well.
Yeah, it was just sort of accepted, and I was never in the position of having to decide whether to make an investment, because at that time education was free in the UK. So I've been in the fortunate position of never having to put myself in debt to make a decision about whether or not to invest in my own education, which makes it quite an easy decision, right? But I think nonetheless you can still look back and say, here was the value of this. But I think what's overblown in education is the idea of the knowledge that you're going to acquire from this process.
Overblown?
I think so,
Okay.
yeah, because I think it's not going to massively move the dial on your skills and knowledge, I would say, because if you look at it this way, I could sit in a lecture, which I do, for 10 hours in a day. How much information are you really going to retain from that 10-hour lecture, right? It's just physically impossible to take that much information away from it. I'm studying macroeconomics. Does it make me an expert in macroeconomics? No. It exposes me to a lot of information, and it gives me some ideas, it gives me a little bit of insight, but it gives me a framework so that I can go back and refer to things. So I'm aware that these things exist, which is, I think, a big part of the value. But I think the more important value component of education is what they call the signal value. And this is basically the idea that having an education provides a signal to employers. And there's three parts to this. First of all, it's a signal that you can work hard, because you need to work hard to get qualification. It's a signal that you're intelligent, because you need to have a certain level of intelligence to pass the exams. And thirdly, it's a signal that you're able to conform to some kind of expectation. And I think that's a huge component of the value. Ironically, over the years, my experience of being an employer and a recruitment consultant, I've begun to put slightly less stock in qualifications as a measure of someone's desire to work hard. I think you have to correlate someone's education with the opportunities that they've had in life. Because you could have someone who is very highly educated, but if you look at the opportunities that they had, it was really easy for them. And I'd put myself into that category.
Well, that leads to, I think, an interesting segue between the two of you in some respects, because you're talking about the actual educational process. It's the process, a framework that you learn as being important. And therefore, in order to maximise that, you've got to be interested in what you're actually studying.
Absolutely.
The exam you take, you're not going to become a macroeconomist, but you may get value out of that in the future in some shape or form. So then that leads to the question, well, how does one go about identifying where one's passion is and where one should be learning in order to improve one's skill set or improve one's motivational aspects? What's the answer to that question then?
And I do believe that that's what so many people struggle with, is what do I really want to do? For me, it was fairly easy. I knew I wanted to be a teacher and affect children. I loved working with children. But then there came to be a time where I just felt like there was something more for me. I wanted to make a greater impact. And I think helping people find that niche that really suits them, where, as with educators, they have so many transferable skills. There was actually an article in Forbes magazine that said that educators make some of the best entrepreneurs because of their transferable skills. And I don't think that they always realize that. So in terms of someone finding kind of their passion, as I believe your question is to be, I think it really does come down to how do you want to serve in this world? Because we all truly are serving in whatever position that we may be in. And so, how do you want to make a difference, and how can you help? And ultimately, that's going to provide you the most value when you know that you're making a difference and you're serving.
What you're saying then is that people need to do some self-introspection and self-evaluation and figure out what actually does make them happy. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Absolutely. Manifesting kind of your mission of what you were put here on this earth to do, I think is extremely critical. And let me just say, I really believe in entrepreneurship, and startups can change the world and make the world a better place.
Well, and that's an interesting one. So startups is one of those areas which isn't quite education, but in order to be a startup, you've kind of got to learn, you're learning about it, and the process of being an entrepreneur is not an easy one.
No. I think it's are there easy takeaways? I mean, how do you, for instance, Steve, when you deal with people from a recruitment perspective, and they say, maybe I should set up my own business? Do you give them guidance on that, or what's the process that people should think through?
I think it's always a valid choice, and it's up to each individual to assess the risks and benefits, if you like. But the way these days, I mainly do executive recruitment, and when I speak to executives, I quite often put them in that position and say, if you were to start your own business, what would it be? Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm asking that question is to get an idea of their value proposition to employers. Because if they wouldn't feel confident starting their own business, in a way it's kind of, you're as an executive in a company, you're expected to do all the things that an entrepreneur would do. You're expected to bring in business. You're expected to hire good staff. You're expected to represent the company. Those are all the things that an entrepreneur would be required to do. So I think it's a legitimate choice.
Is that a question that everyone should sort of ask themselves? What would I do if I had to set up my own business? What would I do? Because it might elicit information inside of them as to what their passion is.
Absolutely, Simon, and I love that. One of the questions that I ask is, if money was no object, but you still had to work, what would you do? Mm-hmm. And it really gets people thinking, and I've asked this in a large group of people, and out of that group of people, there was only one that actually would do what they're currently doing. Everyone else would do something different. And so the one thing I did want to say, kind of to segue a bit into what Steve was saying, there is a clear difference, though, when you're your own boss, when you are an entrepreneur. It's the only way to really, truly achieve the 5 freedoms. And let me explain if I can. So the 5 freedoms in life are time freedom, being able to work when you want, not being told you have to work from 9 to 5. Location freedom, being able to work wherever you want, travel when you want, not being told
from the beach, then in that case.
Exactly, yeah, not being told that you have to travel just during the peak season when it's most expensive. So time, location, financial freedom, of course. When you're your own boss, really the sky is the limit. You're not set at a salary. You can grow, if you have the necessary skills and talents, and the timing is right in the market. Anyway, there's a lot that's involved in startups. So time, location, financial. The second to last one is people freedom. When you own your own company, you have the freedom to choose who you want to work with. And for a lot of people, that can be a real stumbling block when they are positioned in a job because they don't have that choice. And then the last one is purpose freedom, which is really critical, working in your purpose. And so that's where I'm advocating for educators and for anyone who wants to step away and create a business, a passion-based business.
I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
How does one go? Sorry, Amy.
Yeah, let's tying that back to education, and everyone around this table is entrepreneurs, so we all understand
that's
that
right.
Dynamic. But I would not say myself, and I would love to hear you guys' opinion too, that I had the skills to become an entrepreneur right out of formal education. And I'm with you, Steve, and that formal education kind of gave me the ability to have to build it up and build the relationships I ultimately needed to start my own business.
But as a starting point.
What's the breakdown between the expectation of on-the-job training?
Well, before everyone rushes to answer that, the producer is going to be looking at me and saying we need to take a brief break. So think about that subject. Think about what it is that we need to do in order to help ourselves become that entrepreneur. There's many other subjects we need to cover as well in the education area. But we will be back after the break in 60 seconds with Suzanne Klein and Steve McIntosh.
Hey Cayman, this is Caitlin Tyson, your Miss Cayman Islands Universe 2018. It's that time again, so come out and meet your favorite contestants at this year's sashing ceremony. Each of the ladies will have the chance to connect with you and share their personal stories featuring their sponsors. Friday, the 26th, starting at 6:30 p.m. at Grand Old House. Admission is free. We'll be unveiling all of this year's sponsors for the 2019 Miss Cayman Islands Universe contestants. Mix, mingle, and show your support for your district. We hope to see you there.
Money Sense, the only personal finance radio show in the Cayman Islands, hosted by Simon Caudry from the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
This is Money Sense.
Welcome back. In the second half of today's show, we are going to continue our conversation with Suzanne Klein and Steve McIntosh on the role of education and professional development and the role they play in the improvement in the value of oneself. Now, before the break, Amy, I think you were poised, or you had posed a question, so let's just reframe that question and see what our guests have to say.
Absolutely. And Suzanne, you were saying kind of about these skills that you need to become an entrepreneur, but where do you get those skills? Is it from ultimately working for someone else for a time, or in your case, kind of being a teacher in the classroom, or is it from that formal education? I know when I was a teacher at the University of Georgia, some of the firm owners would come to me and say, your financial planning students, they're just not ready. And my response was always like, we can teach them the theory, but you have to teach them the practical side. What would you say about kind of when you're ready to be an entrepreneur?
Well, I definitely think that you'll know when you're ready. No one can actually give you the answer. I do think there's a bit of an element of risk-taking, because you're really, as I did, I left a salary, a pension, healthcare. I jumped as if the net would appear. And it was through, jump as if the net will appear, and it will. If you have the right motivation, if you have the right focus, the drive, there's really, truly about 5 skills that make a successful business successful versus ones that don't. And they are the idea, first and foremost. So anyone, whether you have with my master's degree, there was nothing necessarily that helped me become an entrepreneur, but it was that kind of stick-to-itiveness of getting through that degree, and that actually led me to know that I can do this. I can do anything I put my mind to. So I think that the formal training does not necessitate how you're going to be as an entrepreneur. I think there's characteristics inside that many people don't even know. Many people are sitting on a gold mine internally and externally when it comes to starting a business. And so really those 5 characteristics are, having an idea, putting together a team, having the timing, and timing is critical in businesses that do succeed. There's many businesses that have great ideas, but they're just too early to market or too late to market, and so I do think that there are qualities, but I think more importantly than focusing on do I have this quality to start a business, it's do you have the passion, do you have the drive, do you have the willingness to do whatever it takes.
And that sort of links to your signaling as to the importance of, if you do some professional development, do some courses, if you get through that, through the hard times, through the difficult times, it perhaps proves to you that you do have the motivation and the inclination and the ability to be able to take risks, whether it be start a new job or set up your own company.
Yeah, and it proves to other people in terms of getting back to the job market. That is the signal value, is to say that I can stick something out no matter how tough it gets. But I loved Suzanne's point about the most important thing being the passion, because realistically it's very difficult to succeed as an entrepreneur, and it's going to be rewarding, but it's going to be very tough. And the other question, Suzanne posed the question, what would you be doing if you could start any business, which I think is a great question. The follow-up I would ask someone would be, how much harder would you be willing to work if you were doing something that you loved every day?
What would you sacrifice?
Yeah. Because if someone says, actually, I don't want to work, I want to do something that I really love, but I don't want to work harder, that's not going to work. I mean, for most people, right? It's being an entrepreneur means almost never taking a break from thinking about your business.
Well, that's
and
true.
so it's a double-edged sword in many ways, and it works out for many people, and it's worked out very well for Suzanne and you guys. But I think it's it's a double-edged sword, and it's not for everyone. And some people, I think people need to really decide for themselves whether they would rather have a life that's on rails, where they're sort of, they're taken care of by an employer.
The hours aren't always less, but they're at least on your terms.
Exactly,
That's
yeah.
right.
And that is a big choice to make, as freedom and, the upside, the financial upside isn't necessarily there. It's going to be a grind.
Well, there's a segue to that and a linking between a few things here. We've talked about the importance of education or the benefits of education, and we've sort of come to the conclusion that perhaps it's not that easy to train yourself to be an entrepreneur, but there are still lots of training opportunities out there. What should people think of those training opportunities? Should people be thinking, yes, I should go and do online courses in order to understand where I want to be in my life? Should they be going to think about, I should encourage children to spend extra time at university? What are the important steps that people should be thinking about as they approach this marketplace?
So, if I can jump in, definitely. With this being my fourth company I've started, I have been attendee of boot camps, business boot camps. My company was awarded the #1 business boot camp for the cohort group, and then also Learn Launch, which is a large incubator in Boston, and also business coaches, attending numerous conferences. It's not necessarily formal education that gets you where you want to go when it comes to being an entrepreneur. I think it's the mentors. I've had way smarter mentors than myself, and way more successful that have believed in me and supported me. And so I do think that it's finding the right people and the right business training to do. And a lot of times it's feet on the street. I mean, you have to learn as you're going. And learn from your failures as well.
And you said something there, mentors, and I'm drawing this to what you had said, Steve, about executive placements and executive training and development. Is that something you see with the executives that you deal with, that they use that sort of process as well? They use the mentoring initiative and they talk to people and listen to others about what they should be doing?
Yeah, even that benefit of that network or even the peer group to bounce things off of.
Yeah, some do, and I think executive coaching has become much more popular, and I think it has there's a great deal of value in it.
But it doesn't have to just be executive coaching. This couldn't be, anyone can benefit from surrounding themselves with the right network.
I completely agree. I completely agree. But I think what it comes down to is, whether it's executive coaching, education, any other type of coaching, what it comes down to is a willingness to be open to changing on the part of the individual, and that's what not everyone has. That's something that I just love. The idea of changing myself, I love that idea, and I love learning, and I love.
So it's one thing to
being
go
challenged,
to a course,
but a lot of people don't.
Right.
It's one thing to go to a course,
right.
but you have to be open-minded to change as a result of what you've learned or what someone has told you.
But it starts with the openness, not with the education.
Yes, I
There's
agree.
no point if you're not the type. If you really don't want to change, then there's no point in going to coaching. That's the.
Do you guys
so
tell
that's-
people that? Say, I don't think this is for you.
How do you know someone
right,
isn't
because
open to change?
that is something I'm currently doing, is I am coaching educators that want to make that transition. And I think ultimately the person will come to their own realization. It's not really for me to say, but through a lot of good questioning, you can lead someone there. And I was going to say, one of the things that I thought of, and it actually just escaped me,
that happens to me all the time.
it was
when
a
I'm
good
hosting.
point. It was definitely a good point.
We
will have to come
move
back
on.
to it. It's
Well,
not-
let me ask a question. So, one of the things that has proliferated in recent years, I suppose, has been the number of online courses that people can take. There's an organisation I think called EDX, which I get daily emails from, inviting me to take all sorts of computer programming courses, and one day I genuinely think I will do so, if for no other reason than I don't know anything about it, so it might be a bit of fun, although I'm persuaded it won't be fun and it will be painful. But all these courses, are they of the value that people think they might be of the value? Some of them are free, and often sometimes free things you need to be careful of. Who wants to touch that one? Because it's an emotive
I definitely
subject.
will.
Okay.
Because I'm currently in about 3 online courses at the moment, and with a business coach. So I'm learning, I think, at the most tremendous rate that I ever had before. I feel like as in terms of learning social media for the first time, really, because I always had people that did it for me. So I'm really focusing on learning how to do it myself.
Simon, you could take that course.
Yes. I have a free course for you that's turning out to be really good. So free can be very valuable. A virtual summit school course right now that's online. And let me just say, I mean, online courses are definitely they've already swept the whole education, transforming education, but by 2022, it will become a $243 billion, with a B, billion dollar industry. And so it is already just tremendously changing the way people are receiving their education. And I'm, like I said, currently in about 3 different programs, and it's good stuff.
So, look, and I totally understand that, and I think you can learn very useful skills. But there's a counter argument, perhaps, which is, how do you build up the network effect in an online course where when you go to a college like you're doing, Steve, or you would have done, Amy, where you meet people and the network of people that you build up? How do you address that particular problem?
Well, one of the things that I'm going to be building with my company is Educator to Entrepreneur University. And so how you create a community, because you're right, that is something that you miss that eyeball to eyeball. And so that can be done through Facebook groups and private Facebook groups, and there's different messaging apps and such. And I think that, yes, we are missing that essential human connection, but that is the way that technology is driving our world, and you have to adapt. And
perhaps that links, you can do these online courses, but perhaps that makes it even more important to have that network of people, open-minded, those mentors, to your point, Steve, and just make sure you surround yourself with people who can help you understand what it is you're good at or not good at.
Mm-hmm. I'm personally not a huge fan of online courses, because you miss out on so much of that personal experience.
Provided you spend time doing some of those things separately, you can still learn stuff from those courses, perhaps.
You can, and I think that the big difference for me is that because you're not getting very much in the way of signal value from those types of qualifications, you really need to be doing it because you really want to learn that skill.
Do it because you've got the passion for it.
Don't expect to get much of an ROI from those courses. I mean, you might from the skills that you eventually develop. So I think, like Suzanne says, she's really enjoying these courses because she's passionate about learning these topics. So yeah, if you're passionate about learning social media, then do an online social media.
And there can be value to that, certainly.
It can be, yeah. And at the end of the day, it's better than nothing.
You've got 10 seconds to respond to that.
I think we need to do another show, because there's a lot more that we can talk about. Yes, well, I do disagree with Steve, but that could be for another show.
Well, we'll put down the weapons and recommence battle on the next show.
Yes.
But it is always the case here at Money Sense that we get into our show and we end before we'd like to. Our conversation has much further to go. So thank you, both of you, Suzanne and Steve, for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
With that, let me once again thank all of our listeners for tuning into Radio Cayman, listening live online, or listening to us on our podcast, which is available at the CFA Society Cayman Islands webpage. Although I think we're changing our podcast, and so next show Amy can say something instructive about that, because I won't have done our social media course by then. If you do have any questions and you wish us to consider a subject, email us at moneysense@candw.ky or tweet us at moneysenseradio. With that, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.